We want to get reaction from some of the key players, including Republican Representative Michele Bachmann. She voted against the bill. She's at the Capitol building in Washington with Bloomberg's Lindsay Arendt. Lindsay and Representative Bachmann, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Kathleen. Congressman Bachmann, you voted no on today's vote as well as Monday's. Tell me why you voted twice against passage of this bailout bill.
Because I felt that this bill would not address the underlying issue, which is the credit crunch. After all, that's the significant issue here. What we've created is a new investment bank housed in the Treasury Department. All of the investment banks on Wall Street have gone under. The only one left standing is one that we've just created and put under the United States Treasury. So we have nationalized the bad debt in the United States, as well as perhaps foreign debt coming into the United States. We created a $700 billion slush fund that will be administered by one man, the United States Treasury Secretary. So rather than asking who our next president's Supreme Court appointees will be, I think we need to ask who will be your Treasury Secretary. This is unparalleled power we're putting in the hands of the Treasury Secretary.
Be that as it may, according to you and some of the people who voted no today and Monday, there's still the stark fact that the markets tanked 777 points on Monday after House lawmakers decided to vote no and against this package. What was your sense from constituents and in your own sense about what that meant, the fact that the markets tanked so much after that vote failed?
I think what that did is it sent a signal of fear all across the United States, so that credit started seizing up. And there's been a psychological fear factor that's been at the root of this. That's not to say that there aren't real credit issues. Although in yesterday's Wall Street Journal, both the short-term and the long-term credit numbers were actually fairly normal, as well as the LIBOR rate from London was not very low. So the market indicators aren't there yet, although I do believe it is real, the credit crisis, from people that I talk to back home. The banks are very fearful. To that end, what Congress needs to do is change some rules under the Security and Exchange Commission, as well as the FDIC needs to change some rules. That will do more to unleash credit into the market than creating this $700 billion slush fund, where really what the Treasury Secretary is doing is using that money like paper toweling to soak up bad debt, pull it out of the market. But how that will necessarily impact credit isn't real clear. It's mystifying that that's the approach that the Democrats that have controlled Congress for 2 years, the House and the Senate, have taken together with the president. So the Democrats love to beat up on President Bush all the time, but they're the ones who agreed with the president on this nationalizing of bad debt.
All right, I hear that I'm having a question that's going to be relayed to me from my colleague Kathleen Hayes. Kathleen, go ahead.
Lindsay, thank you so much for sharing. Quickly, though, what about disclosure? What about transparency? Could you ask Representative Bachmann what her understanding is of how this is going to work? I think there's a lot of concern about that on Wall Street and in the general public.
Our anchor in New York asking you, what about disclosure and transparency, wanting to find out what do you see in terms of the future of disclosure and transparency now in the aftermath of this vote?
Well, what I see is that we need to have a privatization of Fannie and Freddie, the largest secure of mortgages in the country. That needs to be sold off and privatized. Also, the Community Reinvestment Act needs to be revisited so that we aren't penalizing banks for failing to make loans to people who aren't creditworthy. We also have to revisit the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, some of the accounting rules that were well-intended but have had bad consequences. This is not a question of lack of regulation. This has been over-regulation because Congress is the problem. Congress created these laws, whether it's Freddie and Fannie, Community Reinvestment Act, Sarbanes-Oxley, that brought us to this point. For instance, this year, 2008, Congress mandated that lenders make 28% loans to people that aren't creditworthy. This is a problem, and without reform, we're still putting bad paper into the system even today.
So despite the calls from Secretary of Treasury Paulson and Ben Bernanke saying that if we don't get something, if we don't pass this bill, that the markets are really going to suffer, we could see potentially a crisis of untold proportions. This doesn't faze you.
Remember, Secretary Paulson said he could only spend $50 billion a year. We offered yesterday in a Republican amendment to give him $250 billion to see us through for the next 5 months, then have a report report, come back to Congress, let's see how it works, rather than committing the entire $700 billion. That was rejected out of hand by the Democrats that control the United States Congress. So we've got one solution, and that's the Bush Democrat solution, and I think that we will one day rue this vote that was taken today.
Some very interesting insights from Congresswoman Michele Bachmann, Republican of Minnesota. We send it back to you, Kathleen, in New York.